Welcome back to AI, Algorithmic Inequity. We're your hosts, Claire
and Ellen.
And in today's episode, we'll be discussing the financial impact of AI and how it largely affects women and other marginalized communities. When speaking about the impact that AI has had on women, it's important to recognize the financial aspect of this impact as well. According to the Global Gender Gap Report, gender parity stands at 68.5% closed, 0.1% more than the previous year. Based on this data, we will reach full parity in 134 years, a number far greater than the 2030 Sustainable Development Goal, or SDG, target. This gender parity is different than gender equity in the sense that equity refers to fairness and justice that pertains to resources and opportunities. Parity, on the other hand, refers to equality in status and amount, such as monetary value. Therefore, when illustrating the impact of finance in AI, gender parity becomes relevant. So how has gender parity impacted our experiences in the workplace?
I think because gender parity, like you said, is more sort of focused on equality rather than equity. That looks at treating everybody the same without realizing that other people might need extra to be able to
accommodations.
Yeah, to be able to reach the same point. So I think I don't think I've ever had a job where I was paid less than
me neither.
a male coworker. But I think I don't know. I think it's sort of like I said. It's the focus needs to be on realizing and recognizing that some people will need extra accommodations to be able to reach the same point as the people who
don't need accommodations.
Yeah, extra accommodations. Yeah.
Yeah. When I think about it, a lot of the jobs I've had, especially summer jobs and stuff, is I've been the youngest one there, so obviously I'm gonna get paid less because everyone else has all of this experience and they've had the education, this is their job, whereas I'm just I need a job for the summer. So I feel I haven't really encountered anything where it's I was specifically paid less because I was a woman. It's more just I didn't have the same experience and I'm that's fair. I didn't go to university for that. But yeah, and then I also had some stats that I wanted to share about the number of women-owned businesses in Canada and then also just businesses owned by other marginalized communities. So according to StatsCan, women own 19% of businesses. On the other side of that, 22% of businesses in Canada are owned by immigrants, 15% by those of the visible minority, 2% by members of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community, and 1.7% by First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, as well as by people with a disability. So what do we think about these stats from Stats Canada?
It's interesting to see how, it's quite low.
Yeah, I would have thought it would have been higher. I don't know. It didn't give specifically if this was all female-owned businesses or if it was just where there's a woman in a senior position, or if it was the woman, the founder was a woman. It didn't specify that. It just kind of was out of 100%, 19% are owned by women. But I thought kind of this is a little off topic, but considering what's going on in the US, the fact that it's there are more businesses owned by immigrants was kind of interesting to me. And then again, StatsCan didn't specify if it was people who were immigrants and that included women. It was kind of just immigrants, visible minority. It didn't specify if there was intersections, kind of with intersectionality. It didn't talk about that.
Yeah, separating it is doesn't really, because how many of the immigrants are women and how many of the queer people are women and how many indigenous women and
Yeah. No, because I think when I first found it, I was oh, this is all female-owned businesses. And then it was no, this is of all businesses in Canada, I'm assuming that are privately owned maybe, or maybe just in general.
Yeah.
That it was 19 and then they split it up in the other ways. So, yeah.
And I don't think it's interesting to see the numbers, of course, but I don't think it necessarily helps to separate into separate numbers. It would make more I don't know, it helps to see the numbers of the different communities, but there needs to be extra information to see
kind of just like intersectionality,
where the
like,
intersections are, like how many queer people of color own businesses in Canada, like what would that percentage be, because how many of that 2% are white, you know, to us LGBTQIA, and how many of them are just white cis men, you know?
Yeah, like white cis like gay men, like, yeah, it is interesting. And then I also wanted to go back to the Global Gender Gap report about how, according to the report, that we won't reach full gender parity for over 130 years. Wow. Like, that was kind of crazy to me to read.
That is.
And I think, I can't quite remember exactly what it said, but the fact that it was like, I think the point was that they wanted to reach it by 2030, or maybe I think that was kind of the original goal. But now that it's like, no, it's going to take another, like, over 100 years. That's like, past any of our lifetimes.
Yeah.
Is honestly insane. Like, obviously, yes, it's good that it's over 50% closed and that we're doing better. Like, the 68.5%, I believe, was from 2024.
Okay.
So the fact that it's, like, 0.1% more than 2023 is good. And the report did have a lot, and I'll talk about this more later in the episode, but it did have a lot of, like, we're doing good things, like, stuff is working. But I think just, like, the number of, like, it's gonna take a long time.
Yeah.
Was just kind of crazy to me to read.
Yeah. Like, I think it's not until you read things like that you, like, fully realise, like, whilst things are improving, we're still so far away from... It still seems like we're so far away from, you know, full equity for everyone.
Like, you'd think we'd be closer at this point, but not to be depressing, but we're not.
I know, yeah.
Like, it's kind of hard to, like, make it not kind of depressing.
And I think as long as, you know, people like Donald Trump are in power, it's just kind of makes you lose hope. I mean, we shouldn't, but it can be hard sometimes.
Yeah. The global workforce is made up of 42% women, which is linked to worsening conditions in the macroeconomy, which means these conditions lead to an overall decrease in hiring women. With unemployment expected to rise around the world, women will therefore be disproportionately affected. With AI, we found that of the industries that have the largest market shares, healthcare had the most at 15.7%. The other industries included finance and manufacturing at 13.6% each, and business and legal services falling close behind at 13.6%. What this highlights is that a female-dominated industry is one that uses AI technology the most to help them do their jobs. In other words, it could be argued that this is an example of AI removing the need for healthcare personnel that is predominantly made up of women. The global gender gap also found that when there is a higher representation of women in the workforce, especially in fields where they are underrepresented, like information and communication technology, the greater these workforces can resist economic recession. Furthermore, closing the gender pay gap in Canada could add up to $420 billion to the GDP in 2026.
Wow.
So what are some other benefits of closing the gender pay gap?
Well, I think just for a start, it's something that everybody needs and should have, just to be able to live and like make ends meet, you know. But there's like a human right. But as well as that, I think having pay equity and having female dominated jobs be paid the same for the same amount of like work and labor sort of helps to, I think it shows that those jobs are just as real and deserving of like respect as male dominated fields, you know. Just because like you're a nurse, why are you getting paid less than a doctor when you're working the same hours? Because nursing is generally female dominated. When nurses are working the same like difficult hours as doctors, you know, they're just as exposed to like the same illnesses, and they have to deal with loads of like sort of gross stuff as well.
I was gonna say, like, they have to deal with all the people. Yeah. And I mean, for some of them, sure, maybe they're like, this is why I like nursing, like they like to engage with the community and stuff, but that still means like you are being exposed to all of this stuff, and they're usually the ones who are getting like shouted at, if you will. Yeah. Like they're the ones who have to deal with the angry patients who are like, why can't I get in to the hospital or whatever, whereas the doctors are the ones who deal with them after the fact once they get into the office.
Exactly, yeah.
Kind of thing. Yeah, and I think too, I kind of had a thought of like, when we think about like female versus male dominated jobs and like why there is such like a distance between them, if you will, it just kind of makes me think of like the patriarchy. I mean, obviously, but also in the sense of like, with what you said about how closing the gender pay gap will benefit everybody. It's kind of like how, I think I said this in the other episode, about how a lot of people, men and women alike, don't realize how much the patriarchy affects them negatively. And so it's like, why even have like male and female dominated jobs instead of just having jobs that are like held by people equally, if that makes sense? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like why is a certain field male dominated? Why is a certain field female dominated? Like why are we assigning gender to these roles?
Exactly. I mean, we assign gender to everything for some reason, but
that's true.
And I think like a lot of people don't realize that like feminism does benefit everyone. And like whilst, you know, it is like first and foremost about women and equality and liberation for women, it also like helps men and people of every gender, because it deconstructs like gender expectations and gender roles and things like that. So like the way that it's sort of, I don't know, gender roles say that men can't be feminine or express emotion, feminism like is going to help with that as well. But people don't want to listen, and they think that rights for somebody else means less rights for them.
Yeah, that reminds me, going on this kind of tangent, but that reminds me of this video that I saw a while ago by this woman. I think her name on TikTok, I think her name is Dr. Bronte. And she was having a conversation with these people who were like pro-life, and she was arguing for pro-choice. And one thing she said like really stuck out to me, and I was like, that's it. And what she had said to them was, because she was using like gender inclusive language of being like pregnant people, and they were just like, why can't you just say mothers? And she was like,
I've heard about this.
Yeah. And one of the things that she said back to them was, to privileged people, equality sounds like oppression. And I was like, I'm probably paraphrasing that too, but like I was just like, that makes so much sense to me. I had never thought about it like that. And I do think that when people don't realize how something is oppressing them, of like, they're like, oh, the patriarchy works for me because I'm a man, and it's like, well, no, it's telling you all the ways of how you have to be a man, and how you have to present yourself. And because you're so caught up in that, you don't realize that like you could still want to be that with feminism. Like you could still want to live that kind of life, but feminism would take away those kind of expectations, if you will, of like everyone has to be like this. Yeah.
And it's just like when people bring up women's rights and oppression of women and stuff, and then a man brings up, like, what about like men's mental health and things like that, and how like men suffer from mental health. But it's like, but if you listen to us, you'll see that like what we're advocating for is going to help you with that as well.
Okay, so back to the financial side of AI. So AI has been developed without careful consideration of how its technology impacts women and marginalized communities in the workplace. More specifically, job displacement and wage suppression are examples of the financial impact of AI on women, and call out the jobs that are most at risk for being replaced by AI. These jobs, which include administrative support, retail, and customer service, are predominantly held by women. If they are taken over by AI and the demand for human workers decreases, it will result in less overall wages and hours for these women. This increase in precarious working conditions for women has another impact on their caregiving abilities. Aside from being overrepresented in care sectors and underrepresented in technology sectors, many policies within the workforce affect gender inclusivity with regards to unpaid care work outside of the workplace. An article from 2022 found that these benefits, which include flexible hours, remote work, and family care, are not readily available to those who need them. More unpaid work means double the burden of working for a salary and caregiving for family members. many women find themselves having to choose between receiving promotions or focusing on caregiving responsibilities. With this burden comes the gap between the 47% of women who take parental leave at any given point in their career and only 4% of men who do. So, are there any other benefits that women are not given equal access to, and how do these statistics reflect the burden of care work on women?
Well, I think this sort of answers the question about how single mothers are treated, like single working mothers, and how they're not necessarily given the same care and respect as like fathers are. And of course there are like so many things in the world that women don't have equal access to.
It kind of makes me think too, I feel like it's that kind of like stereotype of like people, like if a woman is out in public and taking care of her child, then it's just like, oh, like it just kind of, people don't really notice it as much, or if they do, they only have negative things to say about it, where if they see a man out with a child, they're like, oh my gosh, like you're being such a good parent. And it's just like, that's so crazy.
Yeah, I was a few weeks ago I was at the grocery store, and there was a man there with his child, and he walked like past another man who was also there with his child, and one of them said to the other, oh, it's dad day today. And I was like, but like why is this something that needs to be pointed out? You're a parent as well. Like,
I feel like that's also just such like a thing, and I feel like I see it every once in a while on TikTok too, and just on the internet, of like women even just like filming themselves doing all of the work in the house and all of the work for their children, whereas the other parent, whether it be like usually a man, is just like sitting there like doing something else and not paying attention, and sometimes not even like watching the children, and then asking like, oh well, why do I have to do it like when you're right there, kind of thing. And it's just like, because you're the other parent.
Exactly.
Like
you're supposed to have just as much responsibility.
Like even if it's not entirely 50-50, it should be at least somewhat equal, or at least it should be equitable, if you will.
I think it also just points out sort of, albeit unconscious, like biases as well, because like, what if one of those dads who was there with his child was a single dad? What if there was no mother in the picture? Or what if he was like queer and that child had two dads as parents, you know? Like it just sort of, it's very sort of like heteronormative sort of like patriarchal norms that are so ingrained even in everyday interactions.
Yeah, I think that's another whole conversation.
Yeah,
we don't
then
have time
it's
for,
relevant
but
to how those
yeah.
biases get put into these algorithms.
No, exactly. So. Yeah, exactly. Like if you put in the algorithms that like the only like the right, like quote unquote right relationship is between a man and a woman, and then a queer couple is just like trying, I don't know, for whatever reason is like using it for something, and then it's just like gets confused, like the algorithm gets confused, because it's like, well, what do you mean there's like two men, or there's two women, or there's a non-binary person, and like all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like really interesting. And I feel like care work and stuff, I know I mentioned specifically people who take parental leave, but the article I think also mentioned just like how taking parental leave is also very gendered towards women, and how like if you're a non-binary person who's giving birth, kind of goes back to that whole like pregnant people thing of like, if you're someone who does not identify as a woman but you are giving birth, or you're about to become a parent and you need parental leave, but like your workplace won't give it to you because you're not like a woman, then it's just like, because they're like, oh, but you're just the other parent or something. Like if it was like a non-binary person and a woman, and it was like, and you were the one, and the non-binary person was the one giving birth, then it would be like, well, shouldn't the woman take, like it would stereotypically be like, shouldn't the woman take the time off work, even though it's like you know what I mean? Like I don't know if I explained that well.
No, that makes sense. Yeah.
It's all very interesting. So, moreover, during the interviewing process, more women than men are asked about their plans for the future so that interviewers can assess the risk of them leaving the workforce to care for a family. So this kind of goes back to when they don't want to give people parental leave, which is obviously such a big issue in the States, but kind of everywhere, if you will. And so as a result, they may be discriminated against for this decision and will not be hired. Additionally, women are more likely to ask for less during wage negotiations than men, since they may have received lower wages in the past. As a result, a quote-unquote ask gap is created between men and women.
And this, what you said about interviewing leads really well into the research that I did on resumes. And there's been some studies about the use of AI in resumes. And in an article that I read called May AI Come In? Generative AI Shaping Gender Diverse Recruitment in the Hospitality Industry, said that some organizations have started to use AI to moderate the screening, assessment, and facilitation of recruitment and selection to address the limitations that traditional practices have. And some people use it to help them with writing their resumes and cover letters. And a study was used, a study called signaling theory was used, which says that job seekers will draw conclusions about organizations based on information that is easily accessible. And the greater the gender stereotyping by the job posters or applicants, the greater the gender bias perceived by the applicant. Since AI is considered to be unbiased, even though, as we've discussed, that's not the case, it's utilized a lot in a lot of writing. So, what do you think, what some problems this can cause might be?
I mean, again, besides the ask gap, I found another article called Regulation of AI in the Canadian Workforce from January of this year that talks about how AI technology could cause potential risks in hiring, recruitment, management, and then even pay equity, like we talked about. And and then it also mentioned, and I saw this in another article that I read, about how there's been some new legislation implemented by the government, one of which is called BC27, that attempts to create a regulatory framework for AI in Canada. However, it's not yet enacted in the workforce and may not be for some time because these things take a long time.
Yep.
And then it also mentions some other provinces that kind of have their own legislation on AI in the workplace. But overall, the article urges employers to understand the legal risks of using AI, which I think also kind of goes back to our earlier discussion of how we've seen students using AI and even profs talk about using AI, which is still it's so crazy to me that people just are so okay with using it. Never mind the ethical problems behind it and the environmental risks behind it, which I don't think we even talked about.
No, but it's huge environmental risks,
that was something, just to go on that for a second. That was something that I think that really just shocked me and was okay, this is crazy. Was how much when they build the facilities, because when you use AI, you're using it, like we said, through data, it's data processing, if you will. And there has to be some this isn't just I think when we think of the cloud, we think of it literally being a cloud. It's just up in the air somewhere. It's out of sight, out of mind. But in reality, they need these facilities to hold all of these computers and these data processing machines, and they need some place to hold them. And I'm sure a lot of people will know that when, for example, when you're using a computer, especially one that uses a lot of power, it'll get really hot and the fan will start to run and it'll just get it'll overheat. And so for these facilities, and I saw this somewhere and I can't remember where it was, but these facilities, they need to use water to cool these machines down, or they need to use some other form of technology and even electricity to cool these machines down. And so then that's taking a lot of ecological resources to help run AI. And so when you think about it, I think it was every time you ask AI a question or something, it uses X amount of water, or it uses this many gallons of water. And I was just that's so crazy that it's it's not just you're using it and you don't know where the data is coming from, and it's already biased data, but then it's also having these environmental impacts that don't help when we're already in a climate crisis.
Yeah. And I think the environmental impact that AI can have is it's sort of like by extension, what impact is climate change having on women's work and the work of marginalized people, you know, and people who...
Which then goes back to finance.
Yeah, you know, but I even just think about like the abuse that goes into like the work done just to build the technology that we use. You know, the use, like, I think about like Congo and the abuse that's happening there just to be able to release a new iPhone every year.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And then the climate impact of that as well. Like, it's just... That's
it's
a whole
just like
other...
It's one thing on top of another, and it just keeps piling up. And I mean, I guess you could think of it as like a hierarchy, but it's also just like a pyramid or something. Like it's not just one singular... It's not like one issue is separate from all the other issues. It's like they've all piled on top of each other to create one big giant issue. And there is a root to it. But it's like... That's my other thing too, is that like I feel like a lot of times when people are trying to fight all of this stuff, they're fighting the initial issue and not like the root of it. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like just they've got the right idea. Yeah, they've got the right idea, but they haven't gone deep enough for it.
Yeah, like we were talking about AI in one of my classes this morning actually, and how a lot of professors are very concerned about it. But then there's also like sometimes because of the concern, people will use it to sort of see what answer it generates to be able to detect when students are using AI to generate an answer, but then you're still putting information into the AI systems, which we want to stop doing. And I understand why people would do that, but at the same time, like it's a very, like in university and in education, I know a lot of people are, as we are very concerned about it.
No, like I have a friend who their professor has started making them turn in their papers electronically as well as submitting them like in paper and speak to like run it through an AI detector, and they're very concerned because they're like, well, what if something I write is going to get flagged for AI that wasn't before because I was just handing it in on paper and they were just marking it. And it's like, I understand those algorithms and like trying to find AI that way, and I think in some cases it probably works, but a lot of times it's just like either it doesn't find the AI and people are like things are slipping through the cracks, or it'll flag something that's totally not AI. And that is like, if you actually looked at it, you would realize, okay, that's not AI. This is just the fault of the technology. But I feel like for some professors, they'll just run it through and believe whatever thing it spits out at the end of like this person used AI, this percent amount, and should therefore not get the grade that they deserve because they didn't use AI. And it just thinks that they did.
And also, as well, this was also what we talked about this morning, was like, one, what's powering the AI detectors? Are they also powered by AI? I don't actually know.
AI on AI.
Yeah.
Like that's...
And also, I think we mentioned like the ethics of that as well, about like putting a student's work through like another form of technology and how... like without their consent, and like the issues that can cause as well.
Oh my gosh, no, I didn't even think of that. That's crazy.
That was what one of my professors mentioned this morning. So this study that I mentioned found that AI produced or AI assisted cover letters were quote unquote more likable as well as more hireable compared to human drafted cover letters, which supported their hypothesis. And while maybe that might seem good on the surface as a helpful tool, there are a lot of issues with that I think need to be discussed. Like why and how is AI making things that are more likable than something a human being has written? Like why do you find a robot more likable than something, for example, a woman has written? Like what's going on there?
Yeah, it's a lot. Altogether, these examples highlight the need for equitable care systems to be put in place across all sectors.
In our fourth and final episode, we will be discussing this further, and we'll be looking at moving forward and the future of AI and concluding our discussions.